Gentlemen, we have called you together to inform you that we are going to overthrow the United States government. Do you still think that jet fuel brought down the World Trade Center? Does anybody else see a problem here? If the government has nothing to hide, why are they so afraid to answer a few questions? This story does not add up.
Don't worry. Hang in there.
Genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, are organisms in which the genetic material or DNA from one organism is transferred into another, usually between non-related species. This is done in order to improve specific qualities within a resource in order to increase a crop yield.
For example, farmers were facing a problem when tomato crops were freezing overnight. In order to solve this problem, scientists discovered that a flounder fish from the Arctic contained DNA that allowed them to withstand cold temperatures. They then took the DNA from the fish and inserted it into the DNA of the tomato, resulting in a full crop yield.
There are many people that are unaware that the food that they are consuming has been genetically modified. This is worrisome because people have a right to know, especially considering that research has shown that GMOs are linked to health issues such as kidney failure, heart failure, and fertility issues, just to name a few.
Our first proposal is to raise awareness about this issue. There is currently a campaign to label genetically modified foods so that consumers are informed of what they are buying.
Secondly, we are advocating consumers to buy certified organic foods that are free from treatments of GMOs.
Lastly, while it may be radical, we are suggesting government officials to eliminate the use of GMOs until further research has been done that can effectively improve the health consequences.
Well, the simplest way to put it is that scientists had an idea to make crops more resilient to external factors. So let's say you grow tomatoes, and at night it gets so cold that by morning half your tomatoes are frozen, and now you can't sell them anymore. This is what scientists were able to change through genetic modification. They figured out a way to take DNA from one organism and put it inside a completely different organism to create a desired and specific outcome. For example, let's go back to the tomato scenario. Scientists recognized that Arctic flounder, yes, that's the fish, could withstand extremely cold temperatures. They thought, what if we took the DNA trait that allows the flounder to withstand the cold and put it inside the tomato DNA so that the tomato could withstand the same temperatures? Now you've just narrowed your chances of your tomatoes becoming frozen. This idea that you can now get 100% crop yield was the original guiding principle for genetic modification. Our friends at Lily Films have a documentary called The Future of Food by Deborah Coons-Garcia that explains it best.
Genetic engineering is really a radical revolution in food production. It's really a cell invasion technology. You know, people have heard they're taking a flounder gene and putting it in tomato so the tomato can last in cold temperatures. But people don't ask, how does that flounder gene get in that tomato? How does it get in there? And what really happens is, the only way you can do it is to invade the cell of the tomato and deposit the flounder gene. Well, what's good at invading cells? Bacteria and viruses.
After 12 years of searching, Monsanto found a soil bacteria that is naturally immune to Roundup herbicide. Their goal was to genetically engineer DNA from these bacteria into various plants. They cut out a sequence of DNA that is resistant to Roundup. But if this DNA sequence alone is inserted into a corn plant, it will have no effect. So the next step involves E. coli bacteria. Gaps are created in the E. coli DNA, and when the two test tubes are mixed together, some of the E. coli DNA recombines with the Roundup-resistant bacteria. Then the technicians smuggle the engineered DNA into the cells of the corn plant they want to modify. Cells will naturally reject foreign DNA, so they developed a method using soil bacteria that causes tumors in plants. They use this bacteria to ferry the engineered DNA into the plant's nucleus. There are also two other methods used to get the engineered DNA through the cell wall. One uses a stream of electricity to create tiny holes in the plant cells so they become vulnerable to infiltration by foreign DNA. Another is the gene gun, which blasts particles of gold coated with engineered DNA into the plant cells. Each of these three methods needs a promoter gene that turns on the desired characteristics. The promoter gene is often extracted from the cauliflower mosaic virus.
This capacity of bacteria and viruses to invade mammals in different ways is what really has a lot of people edgy about biotechnology, because that's really what the tools are all about. In order to move genetic material from one organism to another that don't normally cross, you've got to sort of behave like bacteria and viruses and invade into the cells and become established, just like a virus must become established.
American Heritage Medical Dictionary defines genetically modified organisms as an organism whose genetic characteristics have been altered by the insertion of a modified gene or a gene from another organism using the techniques of genetic engineering. The hope was that this biotechnology would end world hunger by creating higher crop yields. Ironically, we have found studies that indicate just the opposite. Reports have shown that genetically modified crops actually produce fewer yields. In fact, in some countries where starvation rates are very high, there have been many cases of citizens burning genetically modified crops in protest. Like the Future of Food said, Monsanto, the largest biotech company in the world, was able to make seeds that resisted their own Roundup herbicide. This allows farmers to spray as much herbicide as they want without worrying about their crops dying. But it doesn't stop there. Scientists can now make seeds that produce their own pesticide. This is like you and me walking around with a mosquito repellent coming out of our pores. How do they do this? Scientists found a bacteria in the soil that is lethal to many species of insects called Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT for short, and they genetically engineered it into the crops. So what could the effects be when the bacteria that only used to live in our soil is now being distributed into the air through our crops? In the Philippines, the people living next to the genetically engineered cornfield developed recurring skin, respiratory, and intestinal problems. Blood tests were done on 39 of the Filipinos, and it was revealed that their immune system was affected by the BT toxin that the corn had released. And there's still more. Instead of just making drugs in labs, scientists have been growing crops that produce their pharmaceutical drugs, like research chemicals, blood proteins, antibodies, and vaccines, just to name a few. According to the Society of Diabetic Rights, thousands of diabetics have experienced bad reactions, and many have died as a result of this genetically engineered insulin called synthetic or human insulin. The Union of Concerned Scientists have been urging the United States Department of Agriculture to put a ban on pharma crops due to the potential that they could contaminate all of our food supply.
Welcome to the pioneering new world of farming pharmaceuticals. Biofarming, aiding scientists in cutting-edge research.
PPL Therapeutics is working on a solution. They want to clone pigs whose organs can be transplanted into people.
Cloned and genetically modified cows that can produce milk containing the same health properties as human breast milk.
These glow-in-the-dark cats could help develop treatments for diseases, for animals, and for humans.
Yes, you did hear that correctly. He has put a spider gene into a goat.
Transgenic fish. So the fish actually have what appear to be six-pack abs that we see in humans.
My friends, I am here to warn you. I am here to alert you to the greatest threat to our species and our civilization on this planet. Humanity in just the last 100 years has increased its technological and scientific knowledge thousands and thousands of times what it was. but we are still the same species that we were, capable of magnificent heights, but also of horrifying lows. I want to talk to you about the greatest threat to human civilization and society today, already irrevocably changing the genetic code of the biospheres on this planet, and that is genetic engineering. Now, I love science and technology. I know that it's a neutral thing and that man can use it for good or bad. But that said, the controllers and engineers of our society for more than 100 years have believed that if they can discover the secrets of life, DNA, that they will have the keys to immortality. And now you see all the different news articles where they openly brag about this, and the elite says, we don't need a giant population anymore to run our technological systems. We're now phasing into robotics, where the military's aircraft will be drone, where combat robots will do the fighting, where manufacturing will be carried on and executed by non-biological systems. So there is an arms race going on and a technological race going on right now dealing with genetic engineering. And recently, the FDA has put into effect new policies that allow genetic engineering companies, predominantly big agri, to put on the market any GMO organism they wish without even consulting the public. Now, when you look at this, it's not just GMO grass that takes less water. It's not just GMO tomatoes that last longer on the shelf. Every genetic engineer I've talked to who worked at these large companies said that in the different studies of GMO potatoes, rice, you name it, that there would be the side effect of reducing fertility in the rodents, the rats, the mice, the guinea pigs that they tested it on.
Those that ate the genetically engineered soy, they didn't actually show the problems in the first generation. The second generation was slower growth, slower onset for maturity, but by the third generation, that's when nearly all of the adults had lost the ability to have babies.
And then later in primate studies with monkeys and apes, the same thing happened. And that along with the public trait that these organisms are being engineered for, there are other traits quietly being built in as a Trojan horse that cause biological changes in the body, that increase cancer, that reduce fertility. And these developments are a lot further along than the public has even been told. The information is available, but it's not an issue that gets a lot of media play. And even when I have the news articles and cover them on air, I get emails and phone calls saying I'm a liar. I'll never forget years ago covering news articles about spider goats, part spider, part goat, to produce body armor in their udders, in their mammary glands, that can then be used as an industrial product, a special component. This is the very life force of the planet, the very building blocks of the planet being scrambled together. And people would call me and couldn't believe it. Even today, I see news articles about spider goats and salmon that are been mixed with other insects and fish that will, within 40 generations, extinct the natural salmon that are in the ocean, according to university studies. And people just seem to not care. We are being fed this stuff. GMO crops have been infecting other crops, but also other plants that are growing naturally and haven't been developed through hybridization. When there's a nuclear disaster, it increases cancer, it causes a lot of illnesses, but it tends to dissipate over time. But with genetically engineered and altered organisms, it doesn't go away. It mixes with other species. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about. What is the greatest threat to our species? It is unchecked, out of control,